Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Muzamil Liaqat Ali, Assistant Professor of Biochemistry. Welcome to this clinically rich lecture on the gonadotropic hormones, the master regulators of the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis. FSH and LH are not just pituitary hormones, they are the orchestrators of the reproduction. They control gametogenesis, sex steroid hormone production, menstrual cycle, spermatogenesis, pregnancy, and lactation. A thorough understanding of these hormones is essential for gynecology, obstetrics, endocrinology, and infertility management. Today, we will cover their structure, biosynthesis, mechanism action, biochemical functions, and clinical correlations. So let's begin with clarity and precision. Our today's lecture learning objectives are focused and exam oriented. So these are enlist the gonadotropic hormones, describe the formation, transport, storage, and release of the gonadotropic hormones, and describe the biochemical action of the gonadotropic hormones. By the end of this session, you will be able to integrate the biochemistry of FSH and LH with their clinical effects on the gonads and explain disorders of the HPG axis, right? That is the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis, right? So this topic is of very high yield in exams and clinical practice. So learning resources, we will draw from the standard textbooks like the Lippincott, Chatterjee, Mushtaq, and our detailed lecture notes. These resources provide the biochemical foundation you need for clinical application. So let's proceed with the introduction of the gonads and the gametes. The gonads are the primary reproductive organs, testes in males and ovaries in females. They produce haploid gametes, spermatozoa in males and the ova in females. The entire reproductive process is orchestrated by the hierarchical endocrine system involving hypothalamic, pituitary, and gonadal hormones. Today, we focus on the pituitary gonadotropins, FSH and LH, and their downstream effects on the gonadal steroid, the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So, reproduction is controlled at 3 levels. The very first one is the brain hypothalamic hormone level, right? That is hypothalamic hormones, right? The very first one is the gonadotropin releasing hormone, that is stimulatory, and the inhibitory factor, that is the gonadotropin release inhibitory factor. The second level, that is the pituitary gonadotropins, or the pituitary hormones. Those are the FSH and LH, follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And the third level, that is the gonadal hormones, right? The very first one in this category, that is 17-beta estradiol, that is required for the oogenesis, the progesterone, and the testosterone. Along with that is the 11-ketotestosterone that is required for the spermatogenesis, right? This axis operates through pulsatile gonadotropin releasing hormone secretion, negative and positive feedback loops, and is critical for the puberty, the menstrual cycle, and the fertility. So let's move on to the follicle stimulating hormone, the FSH. FSH is a glycoprotein hormone composed of 2 subunits. The alpha subunit, that is of 92 amino acid and its composition, right? Composed to all, common to all glycoprotein hormone, that is the FSH, LH, TSH, and some of the other hormone, or the beta HCG. So what about the beta subunit? That is the second part, is the second component or the second subunit of the FSH, that is the beta subunit, that comprises of 118 amino acids. confers biological specificity and receptor binding. It also contains carbohydrate moieties like the galactose, mannose, galactosamine, glucosamine, and sialic acid. And the molecular weight of this FSH is around 25,000 daltons. The sugar component prolonged its plasma half-life. FSH is synthesized and secreted by the gonadotroph cells, right? In the anterior pituitary and under the influence of pulsatile release of the gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus that is stimulated by the activin and inhibited by the inhibin from the gonads and high levels of the sex steroids. Plasma half-life that is around 3 to 4 hours, and it is released into the bloodstream and acts on the specific receptor in the gonads. Let's have a look on the functions of the FSH. First of all, in females, it promotes follicular growth by acting on the granulosa cells, right? And prepares the graphene follicle for the LH surge. And lastly, enhances the estrogen production by the action of the aromatase induction in granulosa cells. So elevated FSH indicates poor ovarian reserve and or premature ovarian failure. So what about the role of FSH in males and spermatogenesis? The very first one is it stimulates the seminiferous tubules and testicular growth and acts on the Sertoli cells to support spermatogenesis. It converts primary spermatocytes to secondary spermatocytes. Spermatogenesis requires both FSH and testosterone. The later is stimulated by the LH. Absence of FSH stops the spermatogenesis. So let's move on to the mechanism of action of the follicular stimulating hormone. FSH binds to the G protein coupled FSH receptors on the cell membrane. This activates the GS protein that ultimately stimulates the adenylate cyclase. This results in increase in CAMP level. That is one of the second messenger. This further activates the protein kinase A, the third messenger, and leads to the phosphorylation of the proteins. And this phosphorylation of the proteins alters the gene expression. And this ultimately leads to the synthesis of mRNA. So what about the diseases associated with the abnormal FSH levels? High FSH levels can lead to premature ovarian failure or premature menopause, gonadal dysgenesis, as seen in the Turner syndrome, and Sware syndrome, that is 46XY female phenotype, testicular failure. And what about the low levels? Low levels can be seen, and that results are associated with the polycystic ovarian syndrome, Kallmann syndrome, hypopituitarism, hyperprolactinemia, hypothalamic suppression, right? So FSH level is the key marker in infertility workup. Now it's time to discuss the luteinizing hormone, right? So the luteinizing hormone, again, that is one of the gonadotropin released from the female or the male part, right? So let's begin with clinical precision and accuracy. LH is a glycoprotein with the alpha and beta subunits. The beta subunit has 112 amino acids, while the alpha subunit is the same as we discussed in the FSH. So half-life is around 20 minutes, produced by the same gonadotropin cells under the gonadotropin releasing hormone regulation. So typical levels are the 1 to 20 international units per liter, is seen in the reproductive age of a female, right? And in adults, 1.8 to 8.6 international unit in adult males, right? So what about the functions of the LH? It acts on the theca cells to produce androgens. That is one of the precursors for the estradiol. And it also causes the mid-cycle LH surge, triggers the ovulation and conversion of the ruptured follicle into the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum then secretes the progesterone to prepare the endometrium for the implantation. So what about the functions in males? Luteinizing hormone stimulates the Leydig cells in the testes to produce the testosterone, which supports spermatogenesis and maintains the male secondary sexual characters. Now, let's move to the mechanism of action of the LH. Mechanism of action of LH is identical to the FSH, as G protein coupled receptors leads to the activation of the GS protein, further leads to the adenylyl cyclase activity, production of the CAMP, and that this activates the protein kinase A, and finally the gene transcription. So this is the mechanism of action of the LH. This is identical to the FSH. Now let's move to the estrogen, right? Estrogen mainly is the 17 beta estradiol, is produced by ovaries and placenta. Key functions include development of the female secondary sexual characters, endometrial proliferation and uterine growth, bone mineralization, cholesterol lowering effect, and positive feedback at the mid-cycle that leads to the LH surge. Now, the fourth one, that is the progesterone, right? So production and function include, let's start with the functions, right? It converts the endometrium to secretory phase, that is the implantation phase, right? So it maintains the pregnancy uterine consequence, right? So it inhibits the uterine contractions and lactation during pregnancy. So it inhibits the uterine contraction and lactation during pregnancy. It also thickens the cervical mucus. It also have a contraceptive effect. Last one is the testosterone. So let's discuss this mechanism of action. Free testosterone enters the cell by diffusion, leads to the conversion to the DHT, dihydroxytestosterone, that ultimately binds to the androgen receptor in the cytosol, and finally this hormone receptor complex translocates to the nucleus, and this binds the hormone response element, ultimately leads to the gene transcription. This led to the formation of the protein or the protein synthesis, right? So what about the functions of the testosterone? And intrauterine life, male genital differentiation, and the descent of the testes. And at the level of puberty, development of the male secondary sexual characters like the deepening of the voice, muscle mass, facial or axillary hair or the pubic hair growth, and the growth spurt, right? This is one of the function of the testosterone. And what about the functions of testosterone in adults and metabolic role in individuals? That also got the spermatogenesis effect, right, with the FSH, along with the FSH, right? The anabolic effect includes the protein synthesis and increased muscle mass and the strength. It's erythropoiesis stimulation. This is why the levels of HB hemoglobin levels are high in males, right? So it also increases the basal metabolic rate and glycogenolysis. So deficiency causes the hypogonadism. So androgen receptor defects cause testicular feminization, as seen in the Swyer syndrome. XY female phenotype is seen in that particular case, right? So ultimately, now what about the key takeaways and next steps? So today we covered the complete hypothalamic-Pituitary-Gonadal axis, gonadotropins, the FSH and LH, and they target gonadal hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone, along with the testosterone. These hormones maintain the delicate balance of the reproduction through negative or the positive feedback or the feedback loops. Remember, FSH that leads to the gametogenesis and LH that leads to the sex steroid hormone production, right? In next lecture, we will discuss in great detail about the female sex steroid hormones. So we have now completed the comprehensive mechanism and clinical overview of the gonadotropic releasing hormone and the gonadal steroids, right? So thank you very much for your attention. If this lecture clarified the hypothalamic-pituitary-gonadal axis and its clinical relevance, please like the video and share it with your batchmates and subscribe to the channel for the complete high-yield medical biochemistry series. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next upcoming lectures. So this is Dr. Muzamil Liaqat Ali signing off. Revise the biosynthesis, mechanism action, feedback loops daily. So they are of a very high yield for exams and board rounds. Stay focused, stay curious, and keep mastering reproductive endocrinology with passion and precision. See you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.